Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mike Hofherr, General Manager for Higher Education here at Workday. And I'm joined by Jeff Selingo, author and strategist, Higher Education. Today, we're going to talk about how can institutions embrace change. And it's not just technology, just embracing change in general. We're excited to have this conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff here for his thoughts and get us going.
Well, Mike, it's great to be here. So thanks a lot for having me. And I really think this is a moment of tremendous change in higher education. In the 25 plus years I've been in and around the industry, I haven't seen so much change as that's happening right now. And on one hand, we have a lot of experimentation after the pandemic. Clearly, we have a big focus on online education. We have a big focus on the student experience. We have a focus on belonging in higher education for students and purpose, growing their purpose, as well as hands-on learning. So there's all this experimentation now happening in higher ed. On the other hand, we also, though, have dropping enrollment in many parts of higher education. And so there's these two countervailing forces, a lot of experimentation and new on one hand and dropping enrollment on the other hand. And so that's really putting pressure, especially on the financial side of colleges and universities, for transformation at a very high level. And so when I think of transformation, I think of it not just happening in one part of campus, but across campus, and really thinking about how do we make this a more seamless system that students can get through and that administrators and faculty can work on. And how can we use more real-time data in terms of so that we could kind of respond to students and faculty in the moment. And particularly for this generation of students who want more optionality in their learning, how can we react to that in more real time? So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today and hopefully touch on many of these issues.
I think back to the days when we were making decisions on ERP at my former institution. It wasn't just about modernizing systems, but the functions and the process and the business. And it wasn't just about cost savings on IT. It was about the change of experience for our students, right? For our faculty, for our staff. Some of that not always well received, right? But
right. You're changing the culture. You're changing the culture.
You're changing the culture. You're actually changing the language you speak sometimes at a university, right? And those are heavy lifts. Heavy lifts to accomplish. But in the end, you're eliminating duplicative systems, you're eliminating conflicting business processes, right? To get to a much more, adaptive, ready system to help you move your institution forward.
So that said, though, when I talk to a lot of college leaders, they think of the technology as kind of the plumbing on campus, right? It's just there. Yes, you have to replace this every so often, but they don't quite understand what it can do to transform the campus. So for example, I was talking to a CIO recently who said, we were able to free up staff, 40% of our staff time by moving to a lot of new systems, which enabled our staff then to focus a lot more on students and helping them do data visualization and helping them in the classroom. So how can we think about the plumbing of campus, the technology, and how that can actually transform how people do their jobs?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, when we start to think of these things as technology projects, right? That's when we make the mistake. Like, let's go in and just redo what we currently have. Make that report look exactly like that report we used to have, because we've always had that report, right? These are business transformation projects. These are impacting, student-facing experiences, right? These are how you maintain legal systems, right? And so that IT staff can be more strategic in what they do. And I think it's really about the positioning of the Office of Technology at a lot of times at a university, right? Where is that in the overall university strategy? Is it a driver? Is it an office of change? Or is it a service component to the rest of campus? And it really takes strong leadership to say, we're going to go down this path with a technology like Workday that we know the implementation is going to be disruptive, but the end results are what's going to take this university forward for 15, 20 years.
How can CIOs in particular kind of remain very central to this transformation that's happening at colleges and universities?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think you're starting to see the elastic sort of come back, right? And the muscle memory of pre-pandemic institutions return to like what we looked like before that. I'm seeing it on campuses, right? And I think, the role of the CIO isn't really so much about technology anymore, right? It's about unifying people and finance and student. And when you do that across platforms in something like Workday, right, your institutions immediately gain efficiencies. They gain new ways of doing business. You're able to access data across people, finances, and students and create these, richer experiences where you can make new decisions. And there's some economies of scale in there too, being all in on one platform. So as a CIO, right, it's not so much about choosing the technology, right? I think there's a lot of smart folks that you have on your team that help you choose a technology like Workday, right? It's about selling the idea and the possibility to your peers on campus.
And to really think about what that student experience can be in the future, or what that employee experience can be in the future.
I think the best CIOs in the country understand that, and they help set that vision on their campus for the next generation of students, whether that's how they're accessing technology, whether that's how they're interacting with technology, how they're using it in the classroom, and that's a constant conversation. So, I think, Jeff, like I said, when you gain and you unify people finance students on one platform, right, you gain efficiencies, you gain economy of scale, which in return allows staff to focus on more time on strategic priorities, move faster, become more flexible. That's the vision that a CIO has to sell. And that's what Workday helps a CIO do.
So Mike, colleges know they have a digital transformation problem. In this recent Workday study, Closing the Acceleration Gap Towards Sustainable Digital Transformation, just an amazing figure to me. 68% of higher education organizations agreed there's this growing gap between where their business is and where it needs to be in order to compete. And just 5% of higher ed leaders say at least half of their daily operations are digitized, which is really the lowest of any industry. So this just seems like a big mountain to climb. So how do we close this gap in higher ed?
Yeah, it is. And I think for a lot of folks, it becomes overwhelming, right? Like, where do I start?
Yeah.
Right? I think one is you need to make some decisions on direction, right? And I think through our implementation planning process at Workday, right, we help you bring that tool set and that decision making into
right, because your implementation process is not just about the technology, it's about the culture and the business process change, right? Because
in the end, I always say the technology is probably the easy part, and that's oversimplifying it, right? But the technology, implementing the technology, we don't do that. We've done that a lot of times now, right? And we know how to make that as easy as possible for you. The challenge is changing how you do business. So there's no crystal ball. There's no right answer of where you start. I always just say you have to start, right? And you have to find those things that are most important to you as an institution. Maybe they're a unique program you have, or maybe they're a unique set of values you have, but what's going to help you drive those forward and make your first set of decisions around them.
So you're able to keep part of your culture, but you really have to be open to changing part of the process, part of the culture in order to move the organization forward.
But I'd even go a step further than that. I think culture is what drives everything at a university, at a college, right? And I think retaining that culture, retaining those traditions that we all love at our alma mater, right, are pivotal, right? And putting those at the forefront. What are your guiding principles that are gonna drive you to decisions? Let your culture drive the decisions you make.
So embracing change and not just technology is really going to be the key to transformation in higher education.
Well, Jeff, this has been a great conversation.
It's been great to be with you, Mike.